Nikki Haley has some very difficult decisions to make here. She says she's staying in, but 4 weeks of a bruising fight with not just Donald Trump, but MAGA Incorporated, Julie, could be too much for anyone, right?
It's going to be difficult, but Joe, and you and I have discussed this, she has to go to South Carolina. That is her home state. If she does not have a good showing in her home state, that's a real problem for her. You know, right now you've seen wealthy donors. They say they're sticking with her. She certainly has a large number. But the question is, if these numbers continue to go where they are, what is she going to do? Does she want to walk into Super Tuesday and just be hit with a whopper? I think South Carolina is going to tell us quite a bit.
Well, let's talk about South Carolina for a minute here, Dan. The last credible poll we had was from Emerson. This was back on the 5th of January. Trump, 54. Haley, 25. Now, that's before Ron DeSantis left the race. His votes could arguably go to Donald Trump, make that gap even wider. It's a very different place than New Hampshire, and could be a very embarrassing defeat for Nikki Haley.
Yeah, Joe, I think, you know, it's going to be highly embarrassing for her, obviously, because that's her home state, as Julie was just saying. I think also it's going to tell us a lot about where this race is going from here. You know, it's been interesting to me to see, as Ron DeSantis has gotten out of the race, you know, the support for Haley sort of ticking up. Certainly several donors still backing her.
Yes.
But she doesn't really seem to be able to get over that threshold, 30-something percent, 40-something percent, to get to the point where she can really gather enough of a coalition around her to take on Trump. She's just not there yet.
Well, you know, one thing that Joe Biden has in common with Donald Trump today is that they have both decided the general election has begun. Certainly the language from Trump last night, as he called Nikki Haley delusional following her upbeat speech to supporters, and Joe Biden making it clear in the White House statement, or the campaign statement, that this is going to be a rematch. We actually heard from Joe Biden today. Julie Fine, I want you to listen to this, because he got an important endorsement, we could argue, as he paid a visit to the auto workers, the UAW. Remember, the first president to walk the picket line. He spoke after the endorsement from the UAW. Let's listen.
I kept my commitment to be the most pro-union president ever. I'm proud you have my back. Let me just say I'm honored to have your back and you have mine. That's the deal.
All right, Julie, so I guess it was worth the gamble to walk the picket line and put the T-shirt on and the whole thing. We were told that that was a controversial move. But we all know that the rank and file on the UAW voted for Trump. Does an endorsement like this change any minds?
Well, I'm not sure it changes any minds, but what the president can do is somewhat change the narrative. He can say, oh, you know, Trump, the former president has these big numbers, but look what I'm doing here with some of his supporters. I mean, I think what President Biden needs to do is spend a whole lot of time in a small number of states in events like that one in order to show that he still has the support that he felt in 2020, Joe.
Yeah. One of the most important issues, if not the most important issue in this campaign, certainly in the Republican primary, has been immigration. Dan, we've talked about this a lot. They're working on a deal in the Senate right now. It's unclear if this is going to see the light of day. But to see these polls show that immigration in states like Iowa and New Hampshire, a lot closer to Canada than they are Mexico, is far and beyond the most important issue, far beyond the economy, stupid. And it makes you think that the ground is shifting a bit under our feet here. And we're trying to gauge any potential success or opportunity for a deal on the border, knowing that this could be very toxic in the House. We talked about that yesterday, in fact, with a surrogate of Donald Trump, Florida Congresswoman Kat Cammack, in conversation with Bloomberg. Here she is.
What I can tell you, as someone from the Republican ticket, someone who has been to the border 9 times, my colleagues and I will accept nothing less than a border security package. And what has been proposed by the Senate is really just a trade-off for billions more of Ukraine funding. It's pretty shameful when you have the sitting president of the United States who is willing to secure Ukraine's border, but not our own.
Well, we've heard that line certainly before from conservatives in the House. But, Dan, there's still no text.
Right.
How do they know they don't want to vote for it?
There's no text, and there's a lot of disagreement among even the Senate GOP over what the right approach to this is. And certainly the border is an important issue, not just for the Republicans in the House and the Senate, and the Democrats for that matter, but for President Joe Biden. As Julie was saying, and as we have talked about, Biden needs to win a few states. Those are the ones that are really important: Michigan, Wisconsin, and the border is certainly going to be as an important an issue there as it is in Iowa and New Hampshire and some of these other places. So he needs to rally his coalition, his swing voters to his cause.
Yeah.
And the way to do that is through the border. And they need to come up with some sort of solution here. Whether they can or not at the end of the day, we'll see. But Ukraine funding obviously rides on this too. And that's hugely important, not just for the campaign, but arguably some would say for the fate of the free world. Put too fine a point on it, but basically, if you can't get funding for Ukraine, you're going to have a very different geopolitical picture at the end of this.
What did the White House tell Republican leaders in that meeting with the Big Four? Mike Johnson, the other leaders went over to the cabinet room to sit down with Joe Biden. Jake Sullivan gave them a classified, we're told, detailed briefing on what would happen to Ukraine and Europe if the funding ran out. How scary was that presentation that Mike Johnson heard?
I'm sure it was incredibly sobering. You don't need to be in a classified setting to understand that without U.S. assistance, primarily, some from Europe, of course, but without U.S. assistance and in the billions of dollars, Ukraine is going to look very different in the next few years than it does even today with the border situation that's going on with Russia and the invasion and everything. But without U.S. funding, and you talk to folks who represent the European parliaments, they will tell you the U.S. needs to get involved here. So without that, it's going to be a very difficult situation.
So let's take a look at the calendar here, Julie. The beginning of March is going to be critical here with a potential government shutdown. This current continuing resolution we're under expires March 1st and 8th. In the middle of that, you've got a State of the Union address. You've got the beginning of Donald Trump's trial and potentially an opportunity here to solve the border crisis, because guess what? Everyone's coming to your state on Super Tuesday, and you better believe Donald Trump's going to be down at the border. Is that kind of a quiet deadline to get this done?
I mean, I think that for Democrats and Republicans, there are all kinds of issues that the border presents. For Democrats at this point, this is an issue for Democratic voters. I mean, let's look at Iowa and New Hampshire. They don't border the southern border, and the immigration is their top issue. So at this point, Democrats, even though they have to do something about the border. So if they propose something and it gets through and Republicans say no, Republicans have that problem. However, Ukraine, again, like you said, is extremely important. And in that timeline, you also have Super Tuesday. So it's a huge couple of weeks for Congress. And the question is, who wants to say yes, who wants to say no, and who wants to take the blame, Joe?
Well, and as we consider the future security of Ukraine, there's an important story that, Dan, you have on the terminal here, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee advancing legislation to give the U.S. the authority to seize Russian sovereign assets. Is that a piece of legislation that would advance in the House with what we're hearing?
Yeah, I think it would advance both in the House and the Senate. That legislation today, sponsored by Jim Risch, a Republican, and Sheldon Whitehouse, a Democrat.
Yep.
It has a lot of bipartisan support. A lot of folks are looking at it as a pressure release valve. You know, there's potentially hundreds of billions of dollars there when you talk about Europe. That could alleviate some of the pressure on funding. It's not so much that the money will take the place of what Congress could pass, but it makes it easier to talk about this on the campaign trail, to say, look, we're going to step in, the U.S. taxpayers are going to step in and fund the defense of Ukraine, but we're also going to use some of Russia's own assets against it. Still a very controversial measure because it has to do with the dollar and the strength of the U.S. financial system at some point, too. So we'll see.